This meeting is being recorded.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here today. My name is Michelle Rakowski, and today I will be presenting the third installment of Many Hands, the people who made the Wisconsin Museum of Quilts and Fiber Arts. Today's presentation will focus on the transitional period where the Wisconsin Quilt History Project became the museum that we know and love. So before we dive in, I'd like to thank our sponsors, particularly the American Quilt Study Group, the Kohler Foundation, and the Wisconsin Arts Board, with support from the National Endowment for the Arts. As I said, my name is Michelle Rakowski, and I'm a graduate student at UW-Milwaukee working towards my master's in library science and museum studies. I've been working as an intern for the Wisconsin Museum of Quilts and Fiber Arts over the past year, recording oral histories. This project began last year as a celebration of the museum's 10th anniversary, and I had the honor of collecting oral histories from some of the people who were instrumental to its founding and its ongoing success. I'd like to take a note before we go any further about oral histories. These are all about the memories of the participants. So if at any point in the video clips that are going to follow, something doesn't quite mesh with your own knowledge of events, please don't worry, that's okay, because oral histories are a very personal medium. As I mentioned before, today's focus will be on the transformation of the documentation-centric Wisconsin Quilt History Project to the opening of the Wisconsin Museum of Quilts and Fiber Arts. This took place roughly from 2000 to 2011, with major milestones being the purchase of the Hoffman Baker farmstead in 2001 and the opening of the museum in 2011. The decision to create a museum from scratch came with many challenges to overcome. A location for the museum had to be chosen, fundraising efforts were never ending, countless hours were spent planning what to include in the museum, and new members had to be recruited to help finish what the founding mothers started. The first of these many hurdles was finding the right place to open the museum. We're so comfortable today in the museum, but can you imagine it being anywhere else? There were multiple locations being considered for the museum. And here we have a clip of Maribeth Schmit sharing her memories of searching for just the right location.
And we worked really hard, finding a place. The barn where it is now was not the first place that we looked at. We looked at, from what I can remember, two other places. Another place in Cedarburg and then another place in Racine. And at that time, the farm property was not incorporated into the city of Cedarburg, so it was the town of Cedarburg. And that made a big difference because of the water and issues like that. But it was incorporated into the city, which made it easier for us to hook up to Cedarburg water sewer. So I went to all three different locations, and with a team of other people, and we all put our heads together, and we felt that Cedarburg was the place to go. It's accessible off the highway. It had history behind it, and the family wanted to sell the property, but they didn't want to sell it to someone who wanted to tear it down for apartments. markets or something like that. So that was pretty much, they were sold on it to give it to, well, sell it to the project because they knew we'd take care of it. And there's so many different interesting buildings there.
So as Mary Beth mentioned, there are multiple locations that were under consideration, but there were really a number of factors that helped influence the decision to choose the farmstead. And next we're going to be listening to a clip from Kay Walters. She explained to me how she and Marion Wolf looked at different properties, such as a boys' school in Racine and some locations farther north, but they finally decided to focus on Cedarburg in part because of their many festivals, like the Strawberry Festival and Oktoberfest, and I believe there was also a Winterfest she mentioned. So I'm going to be playing a clip from my interview with Kay, but I've added the transcript so you can read along because the sound quality isn't very good.
Well, we started on Main Street, walking track. All the property that was available on Main Street was little houses, lots of windows, no upgrade as far as air conditioning, all roads, so they weren't doing it that well. So, and I didn't know the big family. My sister went crazy. Daughter, my husband went crazy. Youngest son, I bought it. So I was familiar with the property from that. So we approached Baker family, and they were enthusiastic because they had tried to sell the property for many years. And everybody buy it, all the buildings down, subdivided buildings, available historic park. And we would do that. Plus, it's all on the farm.
So that was Kay's memories about that process. And as you can see, the size of the barn in particular and the potential for kind of upgrading it and expanding on the property was another influential reason for choosing the farmstead. After purchasing the farmstead, but long before renovations to the barn ever started, there was still work to do on the property. In this clip from my interview with Ann King, she's sharing how her mother, Marion Wolf, and other volunteers took care of the grounds. And before I start the clip, please just be aware that there are some phone notifications in the video. So don't be alarmed. It isn't your phone going off.
I do remember this would have had to have been after a site was selected and everything. I'm seeing these 60-year-old women out there clearing the grounds. I'm like, what are you doing, Mom? Oh, I'm going out. We're gonna get rid of all the branches branches and tree stuff and all of the debris that's, oh my gosh, I was just so impressed. They're out there they're going to make this thing happen.
That determination to make everything happen is really a theme that pulled through all of my interviews. There's so much personal work that went into this at every stage. So moving on, while the funds were being raised to refurbish the barn and build the museum, they started having small exhibits and having the gift shop in the farmhouse on the property. And Luella Doss shared documentation from the first exhibit that they had in the farmhouse in 2005 as kind of the interim museum space.
We had 2005 was the opening of the, if I have that here. Yeah. This was a painting done by a local artist, Violet Yonke. And this was the opening of the first, you see it? June 4th, 2005? Yeah, was the opening of the interim museum and the farmhouse. So we went ahead and had exhibits, ongoing exhibits. So there have been ongoing exhibits at the museum grounds since June 4th, 2005.
Clearly a point of pride that there's been so much activity on the property, even though the museum itself wasn't refurbished for many years yet. It's a real testament to the dedication. And here we have a clip from Elrid Johnson, who was one of the many volunteers who spent a lot of time in the gallery and the gift shop when it was in the farmhouse, and have fond memories from that time.
But I was trying to remember, I did a lot of volunteering when we were in that little house on the property, and I spent a good bit of time there solitarily, because even though we were open, we didn't get a lot of traffic. So, but we would have exhibits there, and I must have gone probably more than once a month. You know, I really don't remember anymore, but it was always fun when people came in. But the traffic was pretty non-existent. But somebody had to be there, and and then I moved on to volunteer when we had the museum. So I did that for a number of years.
And the point that Elrid made about the traffic or lack thereof at times in the farmhouse is an important one that we'll be circling back to. Someone else that I spoke with was Carolyn Joss, and she was another dedicated volunteer who kept the farmhouse gallery and gift shop running. She remembers helping to create a schedule to make sure someone was always at the house when it was open, because no one person could do that job on their own. Here we have another clip from Anne King, and as Elrid mentioned, there wasn't much awareness of the museum in those early days when exhibits were in the farmhouse, and part of this was because there wasn't a sign along the road. And Anne King shared how her sister-in-law helped to rectify that.
Yeah. And my sister-in-law, Susan Wolf, that's in that attachment I sent you. She said, well, people are going to need to know about it. Why isn't there a sign out front? Oh, we don't have money for the sign yet. Well, you do now, she says. We can prepare that for them. So there was a lot of help from family and friends.
And that's another important point from Anne, that family and friends, kind of that grassroots nature of fundraising, played a huge role in funding the museum. The image on the left here is, of course, the new sign that we all probably recognize. And the image on the right is what I understand to be the original sign that went up. And this picture was taken in 2008 at a University Days event. While the farmhouse may have been quiet on an average day, events like the popular University Days were both community building and fundraising opportunities. Lovers of the fiber arts could come together and learn new skills and really enjoy the community that the museum was building. Holding special events and door-to-door fundraising was just one part of the equation. Grant money and key investors were also important to the eventual success of finishing the museum without taking on any debt, may I add. In addition to funding the build, everyone had to agree on what elements to include in the museum. And with so many people with so many hopes and dreams for what the museum could be, that could sometimes be difficult. Ellie De Lia was one of the newer board members who came on around 2008. In this clip, she discusses some of the fundraising efforts.
There was quite a span of time from the date that they bought the farm to the time that we broke ground. Well, it was over 10 years. Mm-hmm. So when I came along in 2008, they had done the historical study, which became a foundation to pursue a significant matching grant, which I'm sure Kate told you the details about that. And so they had been raising money for 10 years and had gotten to the point where they had more or less $1 million, depending on what they were paying out for architectural plans and whatever else. And so I came in at 2008, and that effort had been underway all of those years. And at that point, it really had stalled. They had exhausted some of the larger potential resources and grants and whatever else, and they were looking for a treasurer. And I filled that role just to pay the bills, write the bills, but also as treasurer, and because of my background, I immediately became involved in with the building committee and the capital campaign. And at that point, there was one benefactor, he was our largest benefactor, was losing confidence that the thing would really get off the ground. At a certain point, you've got those pledges and you have to do something or turn the money back. And he expressed some concern through Kay. I had not met him yet.
And here we have another clip from my interview with Ellie. And this one is about the business plan that she and other board members created to help demonstrate the museum's long-term viability to donors.
And so I went to the board members and expressed my concern that unless we had a business plan that proved to each one of us that once we opened the doors, we actually could manage it, that we had the cash flows, we could cover the expenses, we could staff it, then I personally really didn't feel comfortable mounting the drive to finish the capital campaign and breaking ground. And everybody sort of took a breather, and we thought, yep, that's important work to do. So we called some special Saturday sessions where we met for 4 and 5 hours at a time. And there were 3 or 4 of these sessions where we worked on a business plan, and it was grassroots, a line item buildup of how many memberships, how many classes, how many school groups, any other revenue, admissions, donations, every line item. What do we think we can do before we get to the bottom line? Let's just really brainstorm realistically, where will the revenue come from? Who will come to this museum and why? And what will they be willing to pay? And with what frequency and what regularity? And so we identified what we thought realistic revenues would be. And then I worked on the expense side and worked with our architect to try to get an estimate of what utilities might be, seasonal fluctuation in utilities, and what will it cost to run the plant. And so with that, I felt we had a reasonably good framework of numbers to identify whether or not we really could keep it open. And we were all happily surprised. I thought, yeah, I really think we can do this. And so with a line-by-line written business plan, we really had something to stand on to go back to this benefactor who was starting to lose confidence. And he took a look at it, had a conversation with us, and reinstated his confidence and his pledge.
So as you can see, it wasn't just enough to have the idea, have the plan, and even have the money as they did at that point. It was creating something that they knew was going to last long after themselves. And that's something we're still seeing today, is that this museum is going to be around for many, many decades to come. Terri Sankovitz was another one of the newer members in the late 2000s who played a key role in getting the museum built. And as she'll mention in this clip, she actually became the liaison for the build.
Between Ellie and I, and if you know Ellie's background being in sales at Exxon and building gas stations and making sure they were profitable, with Ellie's help, my personality of saying, where do you want me to talk? I don't know what I'm talking about, but just give me a few points and I'll be able to be the figurehead. We went out and basically started finishing up or wrapping up that fundraising project. And within a year, we had, with very hard work, I'm not saying it was easy, but with very hard work, we were able to wrap up our fundraising pretty quickly, kind of rejuvenate the project, get a lot of local guilds invested back in it, get a lot of quilters invested back in it, clean up some of the design issues that had become an issue. You know, we were shooting for the moon and we couldn't get anybody off that trajectory, so we were able, via some gentle persuasion, scale down the project to one that we could afford and then go ahead and get it built. So when we were nearing the end of that fundraising, then it became a question of the architect at the time, who is Jim Blyce by this time at Design to Construct. He said, I need somebody who I can contact the day of to get construction changes, to sign off on orders, stuff that you do if you're building anything. And of course, at that board meeting, all I remember is sitting there thinking, wow, I wonder who will get to do that. And everybody looked at me. So I said, well, I just finished building a house not too long ago, so I probably know how to do this better than anybody in this room who hasn't built a house. So again, without thinking, I opened my mouth and said, sure. How hard can that be? Well,
so as you're probably starting to notice, everyone brought their own skills and their own background and knowledge. And that was a key reason why everything worked. It's because everyone had a different piece of the puzzle, and together it's what made the museum happen. And in this clip, Judy Zoelzer Levine shared her memories on the process of deciding what elements to include in the new museum building and choosing an architect who shared their vision.
A museum, you have to go out to reach out to different architects. So we researched, we talked with the Kohler Art Institute Art Center in Sheboygan. talk with, who did they talk to for, as an architectural firm. We talked to several different property managers on how to handle the property. So there was finding the right architect, and everybody then who was in the board put in their dream wish list of what they wanted in the museum. And we took those all to the architects, then came back with a bid that was way over our ability to finance. And then we started paring back. What can we pare back? What can we, put off for later? What can we do now? What are the steps that we can take? How much money is it going to be if we put in X, Y, and Z, but leave space for A, B, and C? So there were a lot of different give and take on how the museum was actually going to take place. But in the meantime, we had also purchased an additional barn. So the museum is actually constructed of two barns. There's the original barn, which we fell in love with, which has a lot of, best part about that was you would walk in and you could see daylight. Oh yeah, it was, but then Kay Walters said, we really need an additional barn. So we didn't know if it was going to be for an addition so that the museum was going to be two barn buildings or one barn building. And then we ended up using the second barn as cladding over the original barn, so that the original barn is intact, and then it is clad in a second barn. So that took place in the middle. So there were a lot of different steps of how should the space be constructed, what were the important things that we absolutely had to have when the doors opened. So that just takes a lot of time, a lot of communication. Again, working with the architects, trying to find an architect that had the same vision that we had. And of course, we had so many different visions. It was kind of hard to distillate what we wanted. So when we found the architect that actually did go with, we were very pleased with the presentation and the things that we needed. And
so as Judy said, and something that Terri had mentioned also, paring down, making sure that the project was within budget was a big part of it, because there's always going to be something more that you can add, but the space is exactly what it needs to be, and in my mind anyway, and it has so much room for everything that we do in it today. And many volunteers helped make the museum happen, as we've seen throughout these presentations. This is a labor of love, everyone's time and talents coming in to make it everything that it is. And it's what makes it such a great community as well, is because so many people have a stake in the museum, whether that be their time or their money or their skills. Everyone is invested. And again, the volunteer work is what allowed, like I mentioned earlier, the museum to be built without taking on any debt, which was an enormous accomplishment by any means. And all of this hard work paid off, as we all know, but the relief and joy was truly encapsulated in the opening exhibition. This image is from that, and you can just see the celebration of color and art. And it was a triumph. It was a decades-long mission to make this museum happen, starting with the Quilt History Project and making something incredible, making something beautiful that's long lasting. And that is the conclusion of today's talk. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope that you'll all join us for the final installation in this series, where I'll be talking about the women who I talked to, who I had the privilege to hear their stories firsthand, talking a little bit about their personal connections to the museum, because this community isn't just a group, it's an amalgamation of individuals. And there's something so exciting and so unique about that because of, as I've said, I'm sure, the grassroots nature of this museum. So I hope you'll all join us. Thank you so much. Do we have any questions?
I don't see any questions on Facebook, Michelle.
All right, then I will, oh, how could I have forgotten the final and most important slide, thanking all of the wonderful people who shared their stories with us. That's my mistake. But I guess I will sign off then and stop sharing the screen if we're all ready.